Warning, acts of gun violence are discussed. Warning, major PNES trauma seizure is portrayed. Noah sniffled, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt as he sat across from Andrew. His voice kept catching every time he tried to put the dream into words. I don't know how to explain it, Noah whispered. It wasn't like a normal dream, it felt like I was actually there. Andrew stayed quiet, letting him talk. I was standing in this abandoned parking lot, Noah continued. It was daytime, but everything was gray, like the sun was there but it couldn't break through the fog. I didn't recognize the place, but somehow it felt familiar. He looked down at his hands. And then, I saw things that don't make sense. It was like everything was wrong, like the world was showing me something I wasn't supposed to see. Andrew leaned forward slightly. What did you see, Noah? Noah swallowed hard. Tate. The name came out barely above a whisper. I saw him, but it wasn't exactly him. It was like a version of him that knew things. He kept trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand it at first. Noah's eyes filled again. He said everything was backwards. Andrew watched him carefully. Backwards how? Noah shook his head, frustrated. I don't know, that's the worst part. I woke up and I still felt like I was missing something, like there was some truth right in front of me and I couldn't grab onto it. He took a shaky breath. And there was this feeling that I had failed him, like I should have seen something, like I should have known. Andrew's expression softened. Noah, dreams like this usually aren't about predicting something. They're often your mind trying to process things you haven't been able to make sense of while awake. Noah stared at the floor. But it felt real, Andrew. I believe you, Andrew said quietly. I believe it felt real. The question is what your mind is trying to tell you through it. Noah rubbed his eyes. I just wish I knew what Tate was trying to say. Noah paused. There was this warehouse in the distance, just this huge gray building, no signs, no people, nothing. He looked up at Andrew. I don't know where it was. His voice lowered. But it felt like I was supposed to be there. Noah's breathing became uneven as he tried to explain the next part. He stared past Andrew, almost like he was back in that parking lot again. I saw this car, Noah said quietly. A pickup truck. It was too dark to tell what color it was. Everything was gray and hazy. He rubbed his palms together. The car wasn't driving fast, it just rolled into the parking lot and stopped. Andrew waited. The area was empty, not just empty like nobody was there, it looked forgotten. Like there used to be a business there years ago, but it had been abandoned for so long that grass had started growing through the cracks. Noah swallowed. And then I saw a man in the driver's seat. Did you recognize him? Andrew asked. No, Noah said, not at first. His voice dropped. But Tate was there in the passenger seat. Noah looked up, his eyes wet. They were arguing. Andrew stayed quiet. They weren't fighting like they were going to hurt each other. They never touched. There wasn't any pushing or hitting. It was just... Noah motioned with his hands, remembering. Arms going up, fingers pointing. Both of them are angry. What were they saying? Andrew asked. I couldn't hear their words, Noah admitted. It was like watching something through glass. I could see it happening, but the sound was far away. He shook his head. Tate looked upset, not scared exactly. Angry, hurt, like he was trying to make the other person understand something and the other person just wouldn't listen. Andrew studied him. And how did you feel watching it? Noah's face tightened. Helpless. The word came out immediately. Like I was supposed to do something, but I couldn't move, I couldn't get closer, I couldn't hear them, I could only watch. He wiped at his eyes. And that's what bothered me the most. I wasn't just seeing Tate. I was seeing a moment where he needed someone and I was standing there doing nothing. Noah's voice broke as he got to that part. He looked down, almost ashamed of the fear in his own memory. The man, he reached into the glove compartment. Andrew's expression changed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He pulled out a handgun, Noah whispered. It wasn't some huge weapon, it was small, like something someone would keep for protection. Noah's hands tightened together. But then he pointed it at Tate. The room went quiet. And that's when everything changed, Noah said. Tate didn't argue anymore, he didn't stand there trying to prove his point, he just reacted. Andrew watched him carefully. He shoved the truck door open and jumped out, Noah continued. Like he wasn't thinking, like his body moved before his mind caught up. Noah shook his head. It looked like he was escaping something terrible, like he had to get away right then. His voice lowered. I've never seen him run like that, Andrew. A tear slipped down his face. I mean it, I've seen Tate angry, I've seen him scared, I've seen him break down, but I've never seen him run. Andrew leaned forward. What did you notice about him when he ran? Noah closed his eyes, trying to picture it. He looked terrified. The word hung there. Not annoyed, not angry, terrified. He swallowed. It was like he wasn't Tate anymore. It was like he was a kid running away from something he couldn't fight. Andrew nodded slowly. Noah, the part of this dream that stands out isn't just the gun, it's the way you describe Tate's reaction. You're seeing someone who has always tried to be strong suddenly become someone trying to survive. Noah looked away. That's what scared me. Why? Because Tate never runs. Andrew let the silence sit for a moment. Maybe that's why your mind showed you that image, Andrew said. Not because it's something that happened, but because it represents something you've always felt about him, that there are things he's afraid of, things he's been running from, even when everyone else thinks he's untouchable. Noah's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. I just wish I could have gotten to him. Andrew's voice softened. You were there, Noah, even in the dream you were watching, you were trying to understand. Noah's voice became quieter as he continued, the memory of the dream clearly still sitting heavily on him. The driver got out of the truck, Noah said. He pointed the gun in Tate's direction. Andrew stayed still, listening. He fired. Noah's face tightened. It missed Tate by maybe 3 centimeters. The gun was aimed near his neck. He shook his head. I couldn't hear everything. The man yelled something, but it was like the sound was underwater. I could see his mouth moving, but I couldn't make out the words. Noah took a shaky breath. Tate stopped. Stopped, Andrew asked. Yes, Noah looked up, like he hit a wall, but there wasn't one. He stared at the floor. He just froze, then he turned around and looked at the man holding the gun. Andrew noticed the way Noah emphasized that. He looked at him, Noah repeated, not away, not down, right at him. And then Tate ran. Noah wiped his eyes. He ran to the left, away from the man, but the driver chased him. His voice became strained. He caught him, then jumped on Tate while grabbing him, holding him upright against his chest. Noah swallowed. He said something like, we go back from where we came or we go inside the building. Andrew's brow furrowed. Tate had a choice. Noah nodded slowly. I think so. He looked unsettled. I don't know what he chose, I just know the man lifted 2 fingers. 2 fingers, Andrew asked. Yeah, like a signal, like a decision had been made. Noah's breathing became shallow. Then he dragged Tate backward toward the building, the door opened, they went inside. He paused. And the door slammed. The silence afterward felt heavy. That's when I woke up, Noah whispered. I was covered in cold sweat, my heart was racing. He looked at Andrew. I called you because you told me, if anything happened with Tate or if I had a dream or anything that I thought was connected to him, you wanted to know. Andrew nodded slowly. I'm glad you called. Noah looked down. It felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see. Andrew considered his words carefully. Dreams can take our fears, memories, guilt, and feelings of helplessness and turn them into very vivid stories. What matters right now is what this dream brought up for you. Noah's voice cracked. I saw him afraid. Andrew nodded. And that's what stayed with you. Noah didn't answer, but his silence did. Andrew listened quietly as Noah finished, then leaned back in his chair, thinking through his words. I'm sure there's a logical explanation, Andrew said gently. Noah looked at him, still shaken. Maybe it was just a dream, Andrew continued. Your subconscious has been working overtime because Tate has always acted in ways that you've struggled to understand. He paused. Your mind wants there to be an answer. It wants to explain the things that never made sense, the moments where Tate seemed distant, the things he wouldn't talk about, the way he reacted to certain situations. Noah looked down. Andrew continued, "It's possible that at some point Tate said something around you. Maybe Tate talked in his sleep. Maybe he told a story years ago and you didn't consciously remember it. Your brain could have taken pieces of things you've heard, feelings you've had, people who have experienced similar experiences, and you built an entire scenario around them." Noah frowned. "Like it borrowed pieces of reality." "Exactly," Andrew said. "Our minds do that all the time. They create connections, fill in gaps, and turn emotions into images." Noah was quiet. But it felt so real. "I know," Andrew said. "That's the part that's difficult. A dream can feel incredibly real without being a memory or a prediction." He leaned forward. "The brain is capable of creating entire places, conversations, and experiences. It can make you feel fear, grief, urgency, sometimes even stronger than things that happen when you're awake." Noah rubbed his face. "So you think it means nothing?" Andrew shook his head. "Not necessarily." Noah looked up. "It may not mean that the events happened, but it does mean something about you." "What?" Andrew answered carefully. "It means there's a part of you that believes Tate is hiding something, a part of you that feels like he's running from something and you're afraid you'll find out too late." Noah swallowed. "But there's no chance it's based on something real." Andrew held his gaze. "Noah, I can't tell you what your dream is, but from everything you described, the most realistic explanation is that your mind created a story from your emotions, your memories, and your concerns about Tate. Our minds do strange things. They take what we don't understand and try to give it a shape." He softened his voice. "You want the answer because you care about him, but sometimes the answer isn't hidden in the dream. Sometimes the dream is showing you the question you've been carrying all along." Andrew watched Noah carefully as the last words left his mouth. The fear was still there, sitting behind his eyes. Noah was trying to convince himself that there had to be a logical explanation, but Andrew could see how much the dream had shaken him. "You're overworked, overtired, and you've experienced a great loss," Andrew said quietly. "Your mind has been carrying a lot." Noah looked away, staring at the floor. "I know you want to find an answer in that dream. I know you want to know if it meant something. But sometimes our brains do strange things when we're exhausted and grieving." Andrew paused, choosing his words carefully. "I should know." Noah looked back at him. "I lost my mother, my grandmother, and basically my father and grandfather too," Andrew said. "Different losses, different circumstances, but grief changes the way your mind works. Sometimes sorrow doesn't just show up when you're awake. Sometimes it follows you into your sleep." He leaned back in his chair. "When I was younger, I had problems with insomnia. I'd lie awake for hours, unable to shut my brain off. I'd replay things, worry about things, imagine things. Sleep is supposed to be when your mind rests, but when you're carrying pain, sometimes your mind uses that time to process everything it hasn't been able to deal with." Noah listened quietly. "Sometimes grief creates dreams that are so vivid they feel like memories," Andrew continued. "You wake up and your body reacts like something actually happened. Your heart is racing, you're sweating, you're scared. It doesn't mean the dream is real, it means the emotion behind it was real." Noah swallowed. "So what am I supposed to do?" Andrew gave him a sympathetic look. "Talk to your therapist about this." Noah looked uncertain. "Seriously?" "Yes," Andrew said. "Not because I think something is wrong with you, because this is affecting you, your sleep, your anxiety, your stress levels. That's worth talking about." He continued, "They might even recommend a sleep therapist or a sleep doctor, someone who specializes in unusual sleep patterns, nightmares, insomnia, things like that. Sometimes dreams can be connected to deeper stress that your brain is trying to process." Andrew shook his head slightly. "I'm not saying that's what this is. I'm saying it's an option if you want to explore it." Noah looked down at his hands. "You really think it's nothing?" "I think there's probably a reasonable explanation," Andrew said, "but I also think you deserve support while you figure out what's going on." He smiled faintly. "And I can't treat you myself?" Noah raised an eyebrow. "Because you're not my therapist." "Because I'm your friend," Andrew corrected. "Those are two very different things." That got the smallest reaction from Noah, a tired half-smile. "I can look up some options," Andrew added. Sleep specialists, therapists who work with grief, whatever you're comfortable with, I'll send you some information. You don't have to decide tonight. Noah nodded slowly. The conversation finally began to settle. The fear wasn't gone, but it wasn't consuming the room anymore. Andrew glanced toward the clock. You should sleep. Noah gave him a look. After everything I just told you. Especially after everything you just told me, Andrew replied. Your brain needs a break. Noah hesitated. I don't know if I can sleep. Andrew softened. Then don't think of it as sleeping. Think of it as resting somewhere safe for a few hours upstairs while I observe downstairs. After a moment, Noah nodded. Okay, I'll sleep. Good. Noah looked embarrassed. Just for a little while. 4 hours would be a good start. The bathroom is right across the hall. Thank you, Andrew. Don't sweat it. Noah climbed into bed, still exhausted from the emotional weight of the night. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to stop fighting the fear and simply rest. Noah woke up around 9 the next morning. For a few seconds, he stayed still, confused. He waited for the panic, the strange images, the feeling of being pulled back into that abandoned parking lot. But nothing came. No nightmares. No dreams he could remember. Just morning light coming through the window. Andrew checked on him a little later. Morning, Andrew said. How did you sleep? Noah sat up. Actually, okay. Andrew smiled. That's good. Noah got dressed and gathered his things, still grateful for the quiet night. Andrew mentioned his plans for the day. I'm going to have lunch with Talia and Tate, he said. I probably won't be back until dinner. Noah nodded. Tell them I said hi. Andrew looked at him. You sure you're okay? Noah thought about it for a moment. I think so. Andrew accepted that answer. Before leaving, Noah stopped. Thank you for letting me stay. Andrew waved him off. Don't even worry about it. A little while later, Andrew drove across town to the Bistro Cafe. The morning had warmed up and the streets were busy with people starting their day. He parked, walked toward the entrance and stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee, fresh bread, and cooked food greeted him as he entered. For a moment, everything felt normal. But Andrew couldn't stop thinking about Noah's face the night before. The fear, the confusion, and the way he had said Tate's name like it carried the weight of something he couldn't explain. Talia sat in her favorite bistro with Andrew, who kept glancing toward the entrance. Her hands were still shaking slightly, even though she tried to hide it by folding them together in her lap. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted back toward the doorway as if she was expecting someone to appear or afraid that someone would. The room around her continued as normal. People talked, dishes moved, conversations carried on, but Talia felt like she was waiting for something she couldn't name. She took a slow breath and looked down at her hands. They were still trembling. No one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and were politely pretending not to. Talia looked back toward the entrance again, her expression tense. Something about tonight felt different. Like the past was about to walk through the door. He's always late, she said quietly, more to herself than to Andrew. I should have known Tate would do this today, too. Andrew nodded slowly, watching her reaction as much as anything else. It seems to be a pattern, he said carefully. From what I've seen, he often arrives after others are already seated. Talia let out a strained breath. He doesn't mean anything by it, he moves at his own pace. Andrew didn't argue with her, instead he observed her defense of him, the instinct to normalize it, to explain it away, but internally he kept tracking it. The timing, the entrances, the way attention shifted when he arrived late into a space already occupied, already formed. Andrew thought about it in terms of control, not certainty, not diagnosis, behavioral impact. A late arrival didn't necessarily mean an intention, but it did change the room. It reset attention. It centered the person arriving, whether they asked for it or not. Talia checked her phone again. He should be here any minute, she said. Andrew nodded. And as he looked toward the entrance with her, he couldn't shake the thought that every piece of the pattern, Wayne, the reactions, the silence, the timing, kept circling back to the same question. Not who Tate was, but how much of the room always rearranged itself around him, whether he meant it to or not. Tate entered through the front of the restaurant, moving through the lobby with an easy, practiced confidence that didn't feel rehearsed, just familiar. Talia raised a hand immediately, her expression softening as she saw him. "There he is," she said under her breath. Andrew watched as Tate made his way over. His clothing and accessories were clearly high quality but understated, well-fitted, intentional without being loud. The kind of presentation that didn't demand attention but also didn't avoid it. Still, attention followed him. Not in an exaggerated way, but in the subtle shifts Andrew had learned to notice. Conversations dipping slightly, people glancing up mid-sentence, a few seconds of distracted observation before looking away again. The room recalibrated around him in small, almost unconscious ways. Talia smiled as Tate reached the table. "You're late," she said, though her tone carried no real frustration. Tate gave a slight shrug, like the answer didn't need elaboration. "Traffic," he said simply, sliding into his seat. Andrew observed the exchange carefully, not just what was said but what wasn't, the ease between them, the lack of urgency. The way the moment didn't feel like an interruption to Tate but like a continuation of his timing. He took in the room again briefly. Everyone was staring at Tate, the man was very attractive and women found Tate irresistible. Many people still glanced over then returned to their meals. Whatever attention Tate drew was loud and disruptive, it became explosive then ambient, fading in and out depending on proximity. Andrew noted it without judgment, mass worship and masculine dominance, just effect. And he found himself thinking, not for the first time, that influence in a room didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply shifted how long people looked. Tate took the best seat at the table as if it were simply where he belonged, settling into it with calm assurance rather than display. There was an ease to him, composed, attentive, self-possessed, that shaped the space around him without any need for exaggeration. He spoke about Chloe's choices at home in a steady voice, mentioning small domestic details like curtains and household responsibilities as part of a larger, settled life that seemed carefully structured. The restaurant itself added to the atmosphere. Warm lighting, the steady rhythm of conversation, the smell of garlic, olive oil, and fresh basil drifting from the kitchen. Plates of Italian food arrived in waves, pasta, antipasti, shared appetizers arranged across the table with a kind of simple abundance. The clink of cutlery and the low hum of other diners filled the gaps between their words. Tate ate without hurry, occasionally pausing mid-conversation to acknowledge the waiter or adjust the flow of the table with small, natural gestures. His attention moved easily between people, never rushed, never uncertain. Andrew observed all of it quietly, tracking details more than mood, the packing of the meal, the way Tate occupied space, the way conversation returned to him without effort. Then, after a moment that felt unforced rather than planned, Andrew leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice so it stayed within their side of the table. He said he had something he needed to ask Tate directly, something he couldn't quite resolve from everyone else's accounts, and that he wanted to hear it in his own words, away from speculation and second-hand versions. Andrew hadn't had a single moment alone with Tate since before the funeral. Every time he had tried to find a quiet opportunity, something had interrupted them. Family members, funeral arrangements, conversations that needed to happen, people needing Tate's attention. Tate had been surrounded by people ever since the loss but somehow still seemed completely alone. Andrew had watched him closely. He had noticed the way Tate moved through rooms like he was present but somewhere else. The way he answered questions was without really answering them. The way everyone kept talking around him about what needed to be done, what needed to be handled, what needed to happen next. But there was something Andrew needed to ask him. Something he had been holding onto since before the funeral. Wayne Vaughn. The name had stayed in the back of Andrew's mind. Weeks before everything happened, Wayne had talked during a phone call to Talia. Andrew still didn't know the reason for it, but the timing bothered him. The conversation had seemed important and nobody had ever explained what it was about. Andrew needed to know the truth. Was Wayne connected to something illegal? Was there a financial issue that Wayne profited from? Was he a burden Tate's family was trying to handle quietly? Or was there something else going on that Tate wasn't telling anyone? Andrew wasn't trying to pry into Tate's personal life. He knew better than that, but he also knew Tate well enough to recognize when something was being avoided. And lately, too many things felt unanswered. The dream Noah had described was still sitting in Andrew's mind, too. He didn't believe the dream was a literal event, but he understood why Noah had been disturbed by it. Tate had always carried things he refused to explain. Andrew needed to separate what was grief, what was fear, and what might actually be a problem. But first he needed Tate alone. Not in front of family. Not surrounded by people watching every reaction. Just Tate. The person underneath the money, the reputation, and the family name. Andrew knew it might not be easy. Tate wasn't someone who opened up simply because someone asked. If anything, questions usually made him retreat further. But Andrew had known him long enough to try. Because whatever Wayne Vaughn represented, Andrew had a feeling it mattered. And he needed to hear Tate say it himself. Talia noticed that Tate had become much warmer toward her after the conversation they shared following her phone call with Wayne. Once Tate realized that Talia had no idea what Wayne knew, his guarded demeanor began to fade. He became more responsive, spoke to her with genuine warmth, and even surprised her by kissing her on the cheek, a simple gesture he had never shown her before. Though it was brief, the affection meant more to Talia than he could have imagined, giving her hope that the distance between them was finally beginning to close. It wasn't anything Tate had actually said. It was the way he had looked at her, as though he believed she had known something all along and had willingly enabled it. Talia had no idea what he thought she knew, but she was certain it was the reason he had harbored so much resentment, perhaps even hatred toward her for the past 25 years. She desperately wanted to ask what secret had driven such a wedge between them, but Tate had made one thing abundantly clear: let it lie. Afraid that pressing him would shatter the fragile progress they had finally made, Talia swallowed her questions and remained silent, hoping that one day when he was ready, he would tell her himself. Her son had admitted to committing a felony, perhaps even multiple felonies if she had understood him correctly. Talia desperately wanted to know what crime Tate had committed, and even more than that, why he had said he had done it so Noah would never know. The statement haunted her. What could he possibly have done that he believed had to remain hidden from his buddy? The plates between them sat half-finished, steam still rising from the food, as the table shifted subtly toward whatever answer came next. Andrew leaned forward instead, slow and deliberate. Closing the distance just enough that no one else could hear, his voice dropped to a whisper. Andrew whispered to Tate. "Is Wayne Vaughn blackmailing you, Tate? I can help if you let me." After Andrew asked the question, the change in Tate was unmistakable. His composure broke, immediate and involuntary. His shoulders tightened and his posture shifted as if he were suddenly more aware of the space around him. The ease he had carried through the meal disappeared, replaced by something sharper and more contained. His jaw clenched, his breathing slowed for a moment, then seemed to reset as if he was actively trying to regain control of it. A faint flush drained from his face, leaving him noticeably paler under the restaurant lighting. Tate shoved his chair back hard. It scraped violently against the floor, the sound slicing through the cafe. His mom gasped, half standing, eyes wide. "Tate," she started. Tate was already on his feet. His heart was hammering so fast it felt like it was trying to break out of his chest. Tate's hands were shaking, his vision tunneling, the room suddenly too small, too bright, too exposed. Every instinct in him was screaming, "Get out, get space, get safe." Andrew stayed seated. "That reaction," I said calmly, not raising my voice, "is exactly what I'm asking." "Don't," Tate warned, his voice raw. "You don't get to say that, you don't get to say that to me," he yelled at Andrew. "I'm not saying this to corner you," Andrew said. "I'm saying it because I understand. I have the same problem. That word didn't upset you intellectually, it hit you somatically. Your nervous system reacted like the danger was happening again." He swallowed hard, Tate's throat tight, the taste of copper in his mouth. Tate couldn't breathe. The cafe felt 1,000 miles away and right on top of him at the same time. "Stop," Tate said, but his voice was breaking now. "You don't get to say that to me." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Andrew leaned slightly closer, as if sharing a quiet aside. For a moment, nothing happened, then Tate froze, staring to the left of Andrew's shoulder. The reaction was so sudden that at first no one even noticed. His expression went blank, like every thought had been wiped from his mind. The color drained from his face so quickly that it was frightening. Tate looked to his left and froze. That's when he saw it, the Wendigo. The hideous, invasive creature stood motionless in the shadows, its hollow eyes fixed on him. It wasn't just a monster. It was the embodiment of his secrets, his guilt, his past, his shame, and everything that threatened to destroy the life he had fought so hard to build. No matter how far he ran, the Wendigo was always there waiting, reminding him that buried truths never stayed buried forever. Tate, Talia said, still mid-sentence. Tate didn't answer. His fingers slowly tightened around the glass he had been holding, then they went rigid. His hand locked in place like stone, the glass of whiskey slipped from his stiff fingers and shattered on the floor. In front of Andrew and Talia, Tate's eyes rolled back into his head as every muscle in his body locked rigid. His chair tipped backward and he slowly began to topple over, barely missing the edge of the table before crashing toward the floor, lying limply on his stomach. Tate, Talia screamed. Tate's left cheek was pressed against the carpet, his entire body limp. As Andrew knelt beside him, Talia's attention was drawn to her son's face. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He looked utterly terrified, not confused, not embarrassed, but genuinely frightened. His wide, panicked eyes carried the expression of a small child bracing for punishment from a cruel, hateful teacher. Whatever nightmare Tate had just relived, it hadn't ended when the seizure did. It was still holding him captive. Tears streamed down his face as he trembled. Then, in a voice that sounded years younger than his own, he began to speak. "Please leave me alone," he begged. "Please, I'll be good, just leave me alone." The desperation in his voice sent a chill through the room. He wasn't speaking like a grown man. He sounded like a frightened child pleading for mercy. Andrew exchanged a concerned glance with Talia, but before either of them could respond, Tate's panic intensified. "No," he whimpered, shaking his head weakly. "No, I don't want to." Andrew's stomach dropped. The terror in Tate's voice was unmistakable. Whatever memory or nightmare he was trapped in, he wasn't simply reliving it, he was experiencing it all over again. And judging by the look of absolute dread on his face, it was something no child should ever have had to endure. Tears streamed down his face as he trembled. Then, in a voice that sounded years younger than his own, he began to speak. "Please leave me alone," he begged. "Please, I'll be good, just leave me alone." The desperation in his voice sent a chill through the room. He wasn't speaking like a grown man. He sounded like a frightened child pleading for mercy. Andrew exchanged a concerned glance with Talia, but before either of them could respond, Tate's panic intensified. "No," he whimpered, shaking his head weakly. "No, I don't want to." Andrew's stomach dropped. The terror in Tate's voice was unmistakable. Whatever memory or nightmare he was trapped in, he wasn't simply reliving it, he was experiencing it all over again. And judging by the look of absolute dread on his face, it was something no child should ever have had to endure. Tate's breathing was ragged and uneven, each breath coming in quick, shallow gasps as though he were bracing for the next wave of pain. He panted with the desperate rhythm of someone expecting to be hurt at any moment, his body tensing as if it remembered an agony his mind could not escape. Every inhale seemed filled with fear, every exhale with the hope that the pain wouldn't come. The seizure began instantly. His back arched violently as every muscle in his body locked, causing him to rise off the ground, losing control of his limbs. His arms jerked sharply at his sides, legs kicking against the floor as his body convulsed. "Oh my God!" someone shouted. People jumped back in alarm. Tate's body began to jerk violently, his movements so sudden and unnatural that they reminded Talia of the exorcism scenes she'd seen in horror movies. His arms and legs thrashed wildly as though he were fighting off an invisible attacker. Even Andrew, with years of clinical experience and countless hours studying neurological and psychological disorders, had never witnessed anything quite like it. Tate's limbs kicked with desperate force, as if he were struggling against a wild animal determined to overpower him. Then came the sounds. The cries that escaped Tate's throat shattered Talia's heart. They weren't ordinary cries of pain or fear. They were raw, primal screams, desperate, agonized, and almost unrecognizable. To Talia, it sounded like an animal being tortured before her eyes. Every instinct told her to comfort her son, but she could do nothing except watch in horror and pray for it to end. "Tate, can you hear me?" Talia dropped to her knees beside him, panic flooding her voice. His eyes rolled back so only the whites were visible. "Tate, stay with me." But he couldn't hear her. His fingers were still rigid, twisted into tight claws that refused to bend. His entire body jerked again, violently. Then a horrible choking sound escaped his throat. Talia's heart nearly stopped. It sounded like he was being strangled or like a woman was choking on a dick. "Tate, breathe," she cried. Her son's chest heaved desperately as he gasped for air between convulsions, each breath harsh and broken. His throat made a strangled gurgling sound as if something invisible were crushing it shut. "He's seizing," someone yelled. "Call 911. "I already am," another employee shouted from across the room. Talia tried to hold Tate's head so it wouldn't slam against the floor, but his body was jerking so violently she could barely keep him steady. "Andrew, what did you do?" she shouted hysterically. Andrew stood frozen a few feet away, pale with shock. I didn't, I just..." Tate's eyes weren't white anymore. They were bright red, bloodshot, and covered with tiny petechiae around his pupils. He was trying desperately to turn onto his back, but his own body wouldn't cooperate. Every movement seemed trapped between his panic and whatever was happening to him. Thick strands of saliva slowly slipped from the corners of Tate's mouth, stretching before falling onto the carpet. He was biting down on his own tongue, unable to stop himself. His lips were cracked and raw, stained red from the blood, making the sight even more terrifying for Talia. Tate's jaw suddenly snapped shut, hard. "Oh God, he's biting his tongue," Talia cried. "Don't put your hands in his mouth," someone warned. "I'm not," she snapped, trembling. Tate sounded like he was choking on something within his mouth. His eyes watered, gagging, but the sound was disturbing. Tate lurched forward, dry heaving, vomiting nothing, but the sound was as if Tate tried to swallow something but choked, puking lemon juice up his throat. Another violent spasm shot through him. His spine arched so sharply his shoulders lifted off the ground before crashing back down. "Tate, please," Talia sobbed. His fingers were still stiff and locked, curled unnaturally inward. His arms jerked again as another choking gasp tore from his throat. The sound was terrifying, like someone fighting to breathe while being manhandled. "Stay with me," Talia begged, brushing his hair away from his damp forehead. Across the room, Andrew looked like he might faint. I didn't know that would happen," he stammered. "What did you say to him?" Talia demanded. Andrew shook his head helplessly. I just said..." Another convulsion of Tate's cut him off. Tate's body jerked violently again, heels slamming against the floor. His breathing came in harsh, choking bursts between spasms. Then a bad smell hit the room. Someone gasped quietly. He lost control of his bowels," an employee whispered. Talia didn't care. Her entire focus was on Tate. Drool and blood continued to run from his mouth as his jaw clenched and unclenched uncontrollably. His eyes were still rolled back as his body convulsed again. Then suddenly every muscle in his body locked. He went completely rigid. For one horrifying second he stopped moving. "Tate," Talia whispered. Then the convulsions returned, harder than before. His legs kicked against the floor as another violent seizure ripped through him. His fingers remained locked and twisted while his chest fought desperately for air. "Ambulance is on the way," someone shouted from the doorway. "Good," Talia cried. She leaned closer to him, her voice trembling. "You're going to be okay," she whispered desperately. "Just hold on, help is coming." But Tate couldn't hear her. His mind had vanished somewhere deep inside the memory that Andrew's whispered word had triggered, and his body kept seizing on the floor while the room around him spiraled into chaos. Tate's body slammed against the floor again as another violent wave of convulsions tore through him. His arms were no longer just twitching. They were flailing, wild, desperate, like he was trying to fight something no one else could see. No, get away," he tried to say, but the words came out as broken, strangled sounds. His fingers clawed at the air, covering his face, then pushing outward as if something was trying to grab him. "Tate, hold his arms," someone shouted. "I can't, he's too strong." Talia was on her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face as Tate's body jerked violently beneath their hands. But Tate wasn't really there anymore. Something inside him snapped loose. Suddenly, the pain disappeared. The choking, the shaking, all of it stopped. And Tate felt something impossible happen. He felt himself lift, light, weightless. His vision cleared for a moment as if a fog had been pulled away. Then he looked down and saw himself on the floor. His body was jerking violently, limbs thrashing as employees struggled to hold him still. His face was pale and slick with sweat and drool. His eyes rolled back as foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. Talia was crying beside him. Someone was shouting for an ambulance, but Tate wasn't inside that body anymore. He was above it, looking down. What? He thought, confused. Then the pain returned, not in his chest, not in his muscles, it started in his mouth. A sudden, tearing agony ripped through his jaw like something had sunk claws into his tongue and teeth. The pain exploded outward, crawling down his throat like fire. It moved slowly, deliberately, like something alive, down his chest, through his stomach, twisting and tearing through his insides. Tate felt it moving deeper, lower, burning through him as if his entire body was being ripped open from the inside. Oh God! The pain slid into his gut, coiling through his intestines like a knife dragging through flesh. Lower, lower, until it reached his bowels, then it tore through him again, violent, merciless, like his body was being ripped apart from the inside out. "I can't," Tate screamed. But he didn't realize he was screaming. Down on the floor, his body arched violently as the seizure intensified. His throat produced a raw, horrifying wail. Employees in the room froze because Tate was screaming, not words at first, just pure animal pain. "Make it stop." His voice tore through the office like a siren. "Please, please." Talia grabbed his shoulders, sobbing. Tate, stay with us." But he couldn't hear her. Inside the storm of agony, he was begging the darkness around him. "Stop, please, it hurts." The pain tore through him again, ripping from his stomach down through his colon like his body was being split open. His body jerked violently on the floor as another seizure wave struck. "I can't take it." Blood mixed with drool at the corner of his mouth as his jaw snapped shut again. Then suddenly, through the agony, one name forced its way out of him. Raw, desperate, broken. "Noah." Everyone in the room froze. Because Tate screamed it again. "Noah, make it." His voice cracked into something almost unrecognizable. "Please, Noah, make it stop." Another violent convulsion tore through his body as his fingers curled rigid again, his back arching painfully against the floor. And still he screamed. Begging, crying out for the one person his mind believed could pull him back from the darkness. "Noah, please." The pain returned with a brutality that felt almost intentional. It ripped through Tate's ribs like iron claws digging between the bones and prying them apart. His chest heaved violently as his lungs tried to pull in air, but every breath only seemed to drag the agony deeper into him. Then it climbed, up his spine, into his neck. His muscles locked so tight his head jerked back against the floor, tendons standing out like cables as his jaw clenched and unclenched uncontrollably. On the ground, his body convulsed again. "Tate, oh God, Tate," Talia cried. But inside the storm of pain, Tate barely heard her. The agony moved again, downward this time, through his hips, into his thighs. It spread like a burning poison through every muscle fiber until his legs kicked violently against the floor, heels striking the carpet as his body tried desperately to escape something that wasn't physically there. Then it forced its way through him, a tearing, humiliating pressure that ripped through his intestines and out of his body as his muscles spasmed helplessly. Tate felt it like a violation, like something monstrous was forcing its way through his spirit and body at the same time. He was certain of only one thing: something was possessing him, something dark, something hungry. Sweat poured from every pore of his body until his hair was soaked and his shirt clung to him like he had been dragged through water. His skin glistened under the restaurant's lights as if he had been standing in the rain for hours. It felt like gallons of sweat soaking his clothes. His heart thundered wildly in his chest as terror swallowed every rational thought he had left. The monster was coming, he could feel it. Waiting, watching, ready to devour him whole. "No, no, please," Tate gasped hoarsely. His mouth suddenly lurched open as his stomach violently rejected everything inside it. A rush of vomit spilled out onto the floor beside him as his body jerked again. "Tate," Andrew shouted in horror. Through the narrow slits of his eyes, Tate could barely make out the world around him. Everything was blurred, distant, and unreal, but then he saw someone standing in front of him. A younger Tate. A version of himself from years before the pain had become something he carried every day, before the secrets and memories had carved pieces away from him. The younger boy reached out and took his hand. His grip was warm and steady, the kind of reassurance Tate had spent years searching for but never believed he deserved. He looked at him with a familiar face and a kindness Tate had forgotten existed. "Everything is going to be okay," the younger Tate seemed to tell him. "I'm not leaving you." The words cut through the fear and confusion surrounding him. For so long, Tate had felt abandoned by the world, by the people who were supposed to protect him, and sometimes even by himself. But this younger version of him stayed there, refusing to let go, refusing to disappear. He reminded Tate that he had survived things nobody else knew about. That he had carried pain no one could see and kept moving forward even when he felt like he was breaking apart. The younger Tate looked at him as if he already knew the truth Tate had struggled to accept. Tate Blue is a hero, the younger version of himself told him. You always have been. It didn't matter if anyone else understood. It didn't matter if people questioned him, misunderstood his choices, or only saw the pieces of him that were easiest to judge. They didn't know what he had fought through. They didn't know how many times he had fallen and forced himself to stand again. But his younger self knew. And in that moment, as everything around him faded and his body fought against something he couldn't control, Tate felt the smallest piece of hope return. He wasn't alone. He wasn't forgotten. The part of him he thought he had lost was still there, holding his hand and reminding him that he was more than his pain. He was Tate Blue. And he was still a hero. The younger Tate, the one from his early 20s, still held present-day Tate's hand. He didn't let go, even as the world around them seemed to shake and disappear. His expression was calm, almost like he had been waiting for this moment, to remind Tate of something he had buried beneath years of pain, fear, and doubt. Remember why we did this, Tate, the younger version of himself whispered. Remember why it was worth it. Tate looked at him, confused and exhausted, struggling to understand. But the younger Tate squeezed his hand, grounding him, reminding him that every sacrifice, every difficult choice, every moment he thought he couldn't continue had a reason behind it. You have to remember, the younger Tate said, you didn't do it for nothing, you didn't keep fighting for nothing. The words echoed through Tate's mind. Beneath all the fear and suffering, there had always been a purpose. There had always been something he was trying to protect, something he was trying to become. His younger self wasn't asking him to forget the pain. He was reminding him that the pain wasn't the only thing that defined him. Remember why we did this, he repeated softly. Remember why it was worth it and why we would do it all over again if we had to. The pain in Tate's body grew worse. His throat tore itself raw as he screamed again, not words, just a sound so full of agony it made several people in the room flinch. It was the sound of someone being tortured, as if his soul was leaving her son's body. Talia covered her mouth with shaking hands as she watched her son thrash helplessly on the floor. Her baby, her beautiful boy, reduced to this. Tate, sweetheart, I'm here, she whispered through tears as she knelt beside him, afraid to touch him too hard in case she made it worse. But she didn't know what to do. No one did. His arms flailed again as if he were trying to push something invisible away from his face. Tate was on the floor, seeing himself and others offer comfort. I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank. I could see my life, history, safety, and public persona crashing down, burning everything in its wake. Every inhale felt like shards of glass in my lungs. My vision narrowed to a tunnel of darkness, and time stopped. The hum of conversation faded. The clatter of plates was gone. I blinked, then I saw it, the dark form that had followed me my entire life. The Wendigo, the ever-present reminder, a living scar I had kept away from Noah, a secret too heavy for words. It was a monster I knew all too well, and it scared the fuck out of me because it held my secrets and weaknesses against me, taunting my dreams with what I failed to speak out loud. I felt myself rising from my body, floating above the table. I was convulsing in fear that the monster would eat me again for the third time in my life. Hands clutched at the air as I thrashed, screaming. Tears poured, hot and unrelenting, mixing with blood from bitten lips. Noah, I screamed over and over, pleading, begging for him to appear to make it stop. No, don't. Tate's voice cracked into a scream that echoed down the hallway. Please, it's going to eat me again. The words sent a ripple of horror through the room. Talia's heart shattered as she looked at his face. He wasn't seeing them. His eyes were wide and terrified, fixed on something none of them could see. Tate, baby, it's not real, she sobbed. You're safe. But he couldn't hear her. Inside his mind, the monster was still there, still coming, standing next to his body, desiring to do many things, to possess Tate, to control Tate, and to do unspeakable things to him. And Tate screamed again as another wave of agony tore through his body. his throat broadcasting the full, horrifying depth of pain that consumed him. Talia broke down beside him, clutching his shoulder helplessly. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Her baby was being tortured in front of her, and she couldn't do anything to stop it. Tate's hands suddenly shot to his throat. His fingers clawed desperately at his own neck, nails digging into his skin as if he were trying to pry something invisible off of him. Get it off, he choked. His voice came out strangled and broken. Tate, don't hurt yourself, Andrew shouted, rushing forward. But Tate couldn't hear him. His body twisted violently as another seizure rolled through him. Somehow he managed to roll onto his stomach, his legs kicking weakly behind him while his hands still fought at his throat like something was choking him. He gagged and coughed, drool spilling from the corner of his mouth as his body jerked again. Tate, Talia screamed, completely hysterical now. My baby, somebody help him. Andrew tried to grab Tate's wrists to keep him from strangling himself, but Tate fought blindly, his arms thrashing with wild strength. Hold his arms, Andrew yelled. He's going to hurt himself. Tate screamed again, a raw animal sound ripped from his throat as his body convulsed. Then suddenly his arms stretched outward across the floor, his fingers scraped against the tile as if he were trying to reach something. Please, Tate sobbed weakly. Noah. His hands stretched farther, his fingertips brushed against a photo lying on the floor, a framed picture that had been knocked down during the chaos. Talia saw it. It was a picture of grapes from their table, but Tate reached for it as his survival depended on it. Tate's shaking fingers dragged the photo closer as his body convulsed again. Noah, help me, he whispered hoarsely. Andrew's face had gone pale as he tried to steady Tate's shoulders. Talia, where's the ambulance? He barked. But Talia was already kneeling beside her son, sobbing uncontrollably. Tate, baby, stay with me, please stay with me. Tate's body jerked again, his fingers curled tightly around the photograph as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the world. Then his eyes rolled back into his head completely. Tate, Andrew said sharply. Tate's body gave one last violent tremor and then he collapsed, completely still. Tate, Talia shrieked. Andrew quickly rolled him slightly onto his side, checking for breathing. He's not breathing, Andrew said quickly, though his voice was tight with panic. But as Talia leaned over her son, something else caught her eye. She froze, her hands trembled as she looked down. Tate, she whispered. His body had gone limp from exhaustion, sweat soaking his clothes, but there was another sign of how violently his nervous system had short-circuited. His pants were damp. Talia realized with a jolt that during the seizure her son's body had lost control completely. Tate had ejaculated in his pants. The realization made her heart shatter even more, her strong, proud son reduced to this helpless state on the floor. Oh my God, she sobbed, brushing Tate's damp hair back from his forehead. My poor baby. Andrew looked away, giving her a moment of dignity as Tate lay unconscious, still clutching the photograph of grapes in his trembling hand. Andrew didn't hesitate, he couldn't. The moment Tate's breathing stopped, the world seemed to narrow into something sharp and urgent, every second suddenly too loud, too fast. Tate lay there frighteningly still, his pulse barely a whisper under Andrew's trembling fingers. Andrew could see from the cold, pale color draining Tate's cheeks that the young man was in shock. His body looked like it was shutting down, overwhelmed by a fear so intense that it had taken over every part of him. Andrew watched carefully and noticed something that unsettled him. Tate's face looked frozen, almost as if someone had pressed pause. No expression, no reaction, not even the smallest movement. His eyelashes didn't flutter, he wasn't blinking. It was as if Tate wasn't there anymore. Andrew had seen people retreat into themselves before, but this was different. Tate's eyes were open, yet they seemed distant, disconnected from the room around him. He wasn't looking at Talia, Andrew, or anyone trying to reach him. His gaze was fixed on the photograph lying on the floor, the picture inside the broken frame. Tate stared at it as if it were an anchor, the only thing keeping him attached to reality. Like he was using the image to escape the terror happening around him, to disappear somewhere else where the fear couldn't reach him. Andrew realized what he was witnessing. Tate wasn't ignoring them. He wasn't refusing to respond. He had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere, his mind had created a way to survive what his body could no longer endure. Tate was dissociating. Whatever Wayne Vaughn had triggered inside him had pushed Tate beyond what he could process. Somewhere deep in his mind, Tate felt like he was being hurt, even though the people around him couldn't see what he was experiencing. The fear was real. The pain was real. His body was reacting as if he were still trapped in that moment. But his mind found a way to protect him. Tate dissociated because being fully present was too painful. Whatever memories, emotions, or sensations were surfacing were more than he could handle, so his brain created distance between him and the experience. It was a way to survive, to not remember, to not feel, to not be forced to endure something that felt impossible to face. His eyes stayed locked on the photograph of grapes inside the frame on the floor. To everyone else, it was just a picture. To Tate, it was an escape. A small, ordinary detail he could focus on while everything inside him felt overwhelming. He stared at the image, holding onto the familiar shapes and colors, using it as a reminder that he was somewhere else, that he was not trapped inside the fear consuming his mind. The picture of grapes became the only thing he could see. The only thing keeping him connected to the present. "Stay with me," Andrew said, though his voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. He forced himself into action, tilt the head back, clear the airway, breathe. His mouth met Tate's, steady at first, controlled, just like he'd been trained. He counted silently, willing Tate's chest to rise to give him something back. Nothing. A cold spike of fear shot through him, but Andrew pushed it aside and began compressions, locking his arms, pressing down hard against Tate's chest. 1, 2, 3, he counted under his breath, refusing to lose rhythm, refusing to lose him. Tate couldn't die here, not like this. Andrew leaned in again, giving another breath, more urgent now, less measured. "Come on," he muttered, voice tightening. "Don't do this, not now." Still nothing. The seconds stretched, warped. Andrew's hands began to ache, but he didn't slow. Compressions, breath, compressions, breath. Each cycle felt like pulling against something invisible that was trying to drag Tate away. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. "Good," Andrew whispered, almost pleading now. Just hold on a little longer." He pressed harder, faster, his composure cracking as fear bled through. This wasn't clinical anymore, this was desperation. Every breath he gave felt like he was trying to breathe life into Tate by sheer force of will. "Breathe," he begged. "Please, Tate, breathe." And still Andrew didn't stop. The fear came in waves, threatening to break his focus, but Andrew shoved it down, locking into the only thing that mattered: don't stop. "You hear me," he said, voice cracking despite himself. "You're not done, not like this." He leaned in again, giving another breath, less precise now, driven by urgency more than training. His composure was slipping, but his hands never did. Sirens cut through the air, louder now, closer. Good, good, come on," Andrew breathed, almost frantic. "They're coming, just stay awake." He kept going, refusing to let the stillness win. Andrew didn't stop, not when his arms began to burn, not when his breath came ragged, not even when the world around him dissolved into noise and movement. He stayed locked on Tate, counting, pressing, breathing, refusing to give in to the creeping thought that it might already be too late. Then the doors burst open. EMTs flooded the space with urgency and authority. Voices overlapped, clear, sharp commands cutting through the panic. "We've got it, step back." Andrew hesitated for the briefest second, his hands still hovering over Tate's chest, unwilling to let go. But training is recognized training. He shifted back, chest heaving, watching as they took over seamlessly, compressions more mechanical, more precise, an oxygen mask secured over Tate's face, equipment unpacked in seconds. The restaurant had gone eerily quiet. Chairs scraped back, people pressed themselves against walls, eyes wide as if witnessing something too fragile to interrupt. Andrew barely noticed them, all he could see was Tate. "Tate, blue, male, unresponsive," one of the EMTs called out, already working. "Weak pulse, earlier possible arrest." They moved fast, straps, lift, the controlled chaos of saving a life. Tate's body was transferred onto the gurney, secured tightly, oxygen pumping steadily now. For a moment his arm shifted slightly with the motion, and Andrew's breath caught, searching for meaning in even that smallest movement. "Coming through." The gurney rolled out, wheels rattling over the floor as the team pushed toward the ambulance. Andrew followed without thinking, like he was being pulled by something stronger than reason. Outside, the air hit cold and sharp. The ambulance doors swung open and Tate was lifted inside. Andrew climbed in right after, not waiting for permission, not even considering that he might be told no. Talia was already there, her hand wrapped tightly around Tate's, her face pale but set with a quiet, fierce determination. She didn't look away from him, not even for a second. The doors slammed shut, then sirens. They cut through everything, loud and relentless as the ambulance surged forward. Inside, it was all motion and urgency again. Monitors, oxygen, hands moving with practiced speed. Andrew stayed near Tate's side, one hand braced against the wall to steady himself, the other hovering, unsure where to land, afraid to interfere, afraid to disconnect. "Stay with us," someone said, not softly, not gently, but firmly, like a command. The city blurred past outside. Andrew watched Tate's chest rise and fall under assisted breaths, each one a fragile promise, not enough, but something. "Come on," Andrew whispered again, quieter now, almost hoarse. "You're still here, stay here." The ambulance screamed its way to the hospital, seconds stretching into something unbearable. Then finally arrival. Doors flew open, more voices, more movement. Incoming." Tate was rushed out, the gurney moving fast under bright lights and automatic doors. Andrew followed, but this time he was stopped, held back as the medical team took Tate beyond a set of swinging doors marked emergency. And just like that, he was gone from reach. The noise faded into a distant hum. Andrew stood there, breathless, hands still trembling, staring at the doors as if he could will them open again. Inside, they were fighting for Tate's life. And for the first time since it started, there was nothing Andrew could do but wait. The doors swung shut with a hollow finality, cutting Tate off from them completely. 1 second he was there, surrounded by motion, voices, hands fighting to keep him alive, and the next he was gone. Silence rushed in to fill the space he left behind. Talia stood frozen for a heartbeat, staring at the closed doors as if she didn't understand what had just happened. As if her mind refused to accept that her son was now somewhere beyond her reach. Then something inside her broke. She stumbled forward and collapsed against Andrew, her hands clutching at his shirt as if he were the only thing keeping her upright. A raw, piercing sound tore from her chest, grief, fear, disbelief all tangled together, and she began to sob, her whole body shaking violently. Why is this happening?" she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of it. "What's wrong with my son, Andrew? What's wrong with him?" Andrew caught her instinctively, arms wrapping around her as she fell into him. For a moment, he didn't have words, nothing that could possibly make sense of this, nothing that could take away the terror pouring out of her. So he did the only thing he could, he held her. "It's okay, he's in the best place he can be right now," Andrew said softly, though his own voice wasn't as steady as he wanted it to be. He rested one hand against the back of her head, gently smoothing her hair, the repetitive motion meant to ground her, to give her something solid in the middle of the chaos. Talia shook her head against his chest. Sobs coming harder, faster. No, it's not okay, he was fine, he was right there, how does this just happen, why didn't I see it, why didn't I? Her words dissolved into broken cries. Andrew tightened his hold just slightly, steady but not restraining, letting her feel that she wasn't alone. His hand moved slowly along her back, up and down, patient, rhythmic, something steady in a moment where nothing else was. "You couldn't have known," he murmured. "Sometimes these things, they come out of nowhere, it doesn't mean you missed something." Even as he said it, he felt the hollow edge of uncertainty. He didn't know what had happened to Tate, not yet. Anxiety attack, panic, terror, peril, seizure, and something else entirely. His mind tried to sort through possibilities, but none of them mattered right now. Right now, Talia was breaking in his arms. "He's strong," Andrew added quietly, almost more to hold onto the thought than to convince her. "You know he is, he's fighting." Talia clung to him, her fingers tightening in the fabric of his shirt as if she could anchor herself there. "He's my baby," she whispered through sobs. "He's my only baby, I can't lose him, Andrew, I can't." "You're not going to," Andrew said, more firmly this time, though his chest ached with the weight of the promise. "You hear me, you're not going to." He kept smoothing her hair, slower now, gentler, letting the motion speak where words failed. Around them, the hospital moved on, nurses passing, distant voices calling out, but it all felt far away, like it belonged to another world. Here there was only waiting, only fear, only the fragile, desperate hope that behind those doors Tate was still holding on. 6 hours felt like a lifetime stretched thin. Talia hadn't stopped crying, not really. The intensity came in waves now, sometimes breaking into quiet, trembling sobs, sometimes rising again into sharp, breathless panic that left her clinging to Andrew just to stay upright. Time had blurred into something meaningless, seconds dragging, minutes dissolving, hope and dread tangling together until neither of them could tell which one they were feeling. Andrew had asked Tate the question carefully, not because he wanted to accuse him of anything, but because he was trying to understand what kind of danger he was facing. "Is Wayne blackmailing you?" The question had come from a place of concern. Andrew wasn't trying to pry into Tate's private life or demand answers he wasn't ready to give. He wanted Tate to know that if someone was threatening him, he didn't have to handle it alone. There were ways to fight back. There were people who could help. Andrew knew some of the best lawyers in Los Angeles. He had spent years building relationships with people who understood how to protect someone when their reputation, their future, or their freedom was at risk. He knew people in law enforcement as well, people who could help determine whether a threat was real, whether someone was crossing a line, and what options Tate had. At first, Andrew tried to convince himself that whatever Wayne had over Tate might not be as serious as Tate believed. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was something embarrassing but not dangerous. Maybe Tate had done something years ago, something foolish, something he regretted, and Wayne had found a way to use it against him. A private message, a photograph, a recording, something that could damage Tate's reputation or humiliate him if it became public. Andrew had seen situations like that before. People made mistakes. People had moments they wished they could take back. Sometimes someone cruel would take those mistakes and turn them into weapons. That was what Andrew thought he was dealing with. A threat. An indiscretion. Something painful but manageable. Something he could help Tate survive. But after what Andrew witnessed at the cafe, that belief disappeared completely. The way Tate reacted, the terror in his eyes, the way his entire body seemed to shut down as if his mind was trying to escape from something unbearable. Andrew had seen fear before, but this was different. This wasn't the reaction of someone worried about embarrassment or a secret being exposed. This was the reaction of someone who believed they were in danger. The cafe had erased every misunderstanding Andrew had been holding onto. Whatever Wayne Vaughn had over Tate was not some simple mistake. It wasn't a foolish decision, a regrettable moment, or something that could be solved with a good attorney and a private conversation. Wayne had something much deeper. Something that had reached into the core of who Tate was. And as Andrew watched Tate break down in front of him, he realized he was looking at something far more terrifying than any scandal, mistake, or legal problem he had ever encountered. Whatever Wayne knew, it had the power to destroy Tate from the inside out. Andrew stayed with her the entire time. He barely moved except to steady her when her legs threatened to give out, or to guide her back into her chair when she stood too quickly, as if she might somehow force news to come faster. His hand remained at her back, slow and constant, grounding her whenever she started to spiral again. Every time the doors opened, both of them looked up. Every time it wasn't for them. Until finally, a man in a white coat stepped into the waiting room, scanning the space with quiet purpose. Andrew felt Talia tense instantly in his arms. "Hi," the man said gently as he approached. "My name is Dr. Adams. I'm sorry if you've been waiting a long time. Would you both come with me to my office?" The apology alone made Talia's breath hitch, like she already knew whatever came. A man in a white coat stepped out. He looked practiced in this moment, measured expression, careful pace, but not detached. The kind of calm that comes from doing this too many times, not from indifference. He looked at Andrew and Talia, assessing who Tate's mom and family member were. He straightened his glasses, walking toward his office, leading the way. Talia reacted immediately, as if the words "come with me" were the only thing keeping her upright. She nodded quickly, wiping her face with shaking hands, already pushing herself to stand before she was fully steady. Her legs almost gave out. Andrew moved instantly, stepping in close so she could lean into him without hesitation. "I've got you," he said quietly, not dramatically, just certain. Talia clung to his arm as they walked, her grip tight enough that her fingers trembled against his sleeve. Every step toward the doctor's office felt heavier than the last, like the air itself had thickened. Andrew stayed slightly behind her, not in front, just enough to support if she stumbled, just enough to make sure she wasn't alone when whatever came next landed. Dr. Adams led them down the hallway, his voice softer now. I know this has been an extremely stressful night for both of you. I want to go over what we found and what's happening with Tate right now. Tate is stable, but he's still in emergency mode until he regains consciousness. At the mention of Tate's name, Talia made a small, broken sound and shook her head once like she couldn't bear to hear it yet. Andrew tightened his hold slightly, not stopping her, just anchoring her. They reached the office door. Dr. Adams opened it and stepped aside for them to enter first. Talia hesitated in the doorway for only a second, then went in like she was stepping into the only place in the world where she might finally get an answer. Andrew followed right behind her. Talia slumped into a chair near the doctor's desk while Andrew held her hand. Dr. Adams kept his voice steady, almost deliberately gentle, as if he were trying to lower the temperature in the room just by how he spoke. The reason I apologize for taking so long, Dr. Adams said, is that when Tate arrived at the hospital he was unconscious. Talia listened carefully, her anxiety growing with every word. When he regained consciousness, several doctors and nurses were trying to help prepare him for observation and run the necessary tests. But when Tate realized where he was and saw all the people around him, he panicked. He became extremely distressed and had another seizure. Dr. Adam paused, his expression becoming more serious. This one was different. It was more severe than the first episode Andrew described to the EMTs. The movements were stronger and his body was struggling in a way that concerned everyone in the room. We recorded the seizure, he continued. Not because we wanted to invade his privacy, but because we needed specialists and other physicians to review exactly what happened. We wanted to better understand the severity, the muscle coordination, and what might have triggered this response. Talia felt her stomach drop. And after that, she asked quietly, Doctor. Adam looked down for a moment before answering. After the seizure ended, Tate went into another state of severe shock. His body was overwhelmed. His vital signs became unstable and we had to intervene immediately. We had to resuscitate him. The words hung in the air. Talia struggled to process them. He almost died, she whispered. Dr. Adams' expression softened. He was in a critical state, Talia. Right now, the most important thing is understanding what caused this and making sure he is safe. Whatever Tate experienced before this happened, his body reacted as if it was facing something life-threatening. Talia was crying. He wasn't just in a critical state, Dr. Adams said quietly. Talia looked at him, her heart sinking. Tate stopped breathing. The room seemed to become completely silent. Luckily, we were able to resuscitate him, the doctor continued. But if the people around him hadn't recognized what was happening and called an ambulance when they did, then yes, Talia, he would have died. The words hit harder than anything she had heard all day. Your son is more than lucky, Dr. Adams said. He is blessed that he had people around him who acted quickly. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait to see if it would pass. They got him help when he needed it most. He took a breath, choosing his next words carefully. In all my years working in trauma medicine, I have never seen a reaction like this. I've treated people after severe accidents, major injuries, and life-threatening events, but what happened with Tate is something I don't want to dismiss or pretend I understand completely without more information. Talia watched his face, realizing how unusual this was for him. That's why I've brought in specialists, Dr. Adam explained. I want multiple experts looking at this from different perspectives. We need to understand what happened to his body and why it responded this way. He paused. We even had the world's chief expert in seizures and trauma flown in from Johns Hopkins by helicopter to evaluate what we're seeing. Talia stared at him, overwhelmed. A helicopter, she whispered. Dr. Adam nodded. Yes, because this case is outside the ordinary. Tate deserves every resource available. Right now, we're not going to make assumptions. We're going to investigate every possibility and do everything we can to help him. I wanted to do this in a quiet environment, he repeated, so we could talk privately. We ran tests, EKGs, continuous cardiac monitoring, neurological screening, and additional evaluations, because we didn't want to miss anything important. Talia sat rigid in the chair, still visibly shaken, her hands twisting together in her lap. Andrew remained beside her, not speaking yet but clearly listening with full focus. Dr. Adams folded his hands. "At this point," he said carefully, "I've ruled out epileptic seizures as the cause of your son's current condition. There is no indication from his EEG results or his neurological presentation that he has epilepsy." The words landed hard. Talia blinked at him as if she hadn't processed them correctly. "No indication," she repeated slowly, voice rising. "But he's been having episodes for years since he was 2. We were told it was seizures. Every doctor, every hospital visit, they said it had to be seizures." Andrew's jaw tightened slightly, but he stayed quiet, watching both of them. Dr. Adams nodded once, acknowledging the weight of her words. "I understand that's what you were told," he said. "And I don't doubt that what you witnessed over the years looked exactly like seizures. That's why it's such a commonly missed diagnosis." Talia shook her head, tears returning again, frustration mixing with fear. "So what does that mean? You're saying everyone was wrong?" "I'm saying the label may have been incorrect," Dr. Adams replied gently. "What your son is experiencing does not appear to be epileptic seizures. That doesn't make the episodes less real or less serious. It means they originate from a different mechanism." Andrew finally spoke, voice controlled but intent. "Then what is it?" Dr. Adams looked at him briefly before answering. "Based on his presentation, history, and today's results, we are most likely dealing with psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, or PNES." Talia's expression shifted immediately, confusion, then alarm. "Psychogenic," she echoed, "so it's psychological." "It is neurological in expression but psychological in origin," Dr. Adams clarified. "It's not intentional and it's not made up. It's the brain and body responding to stress or emotional overload in a way that mimics seizures." Talia's voice broke. "So you're saying it's all in his head?" "No," Andrew said quietly, more firmly this time, stepping into the space before the misunderstanding hardened. "That's not what he's saying." Dr. Adams nodded in agreement. "Correct, it is very real. The movements, the unresponsiveness, the breathing changes, all of that is physically happening, but it is not caused by electrical seizure activity in the brain." The room went quiet again, heavier now with the shift in understanding. Talia pressed a hand to her mouth, staring down at the floor as if trying to hold herself together by force. "He was on the floor tonight," she whispered. "He wasn't breathing right. I thought we were losing him." "I know," Dr. Adams said softly, "and your response was absolutely appropriate. From the outside, it is indistinguishable from a medical emergency like epilepsy or cardiac arrest." Andrew's eyes stayed fixed on the doctor, absorbing every detail, already processing the implications. Dr. Adams continued. "The important thing now is that this changes how we treat and support him moving forward. Anti-seizure medications typically do not help in PNES because the underlying cause is not epileptic activity. What does help is targeted psychological treatment, therapy focused on stress regulation, trauma processing if relevant, and learning to recognize triggers." Talia's breathing became uneven again. "So, what do I do when it happens again?" "You treat it as you did today in terms of safety," Dr. Adams said. "You ensure he is protected from injury, monitor his breathing, and seek emergency care if needed. But long-term, we work to reduce the frequency and severity of these episodes through treatment." Silence settled again. This time it wasn't disbelief, it was exhaustion. Andrew glanced toward Talia. Her shoulders were trembling, but she was still listening, still trying to hold onto meaning in something that had just been completely redefined. Dr. Adams softened his tone. "I know this is a lot to process," he said, "but I want you to understand something very clearly. Your son is not faking this and he is not alone in it, and with the right care many patients improve significantly." Talia finally looked up, eyes red and hollow. "And right now?" she asked quietly. Dr. Adams didn't hesitate. "He is stable," he said. "He is being monitored closely, and he is alive." Andrew's posture eased just slightly at those words, subtle but real. Talia exhaled shakily, as if she'd been holding her breath for hours and only just remembered how to let it out. The room stayed quiet after that, not resolved, but no longer completely lost. Dr. Adams waited a moment, letting the silence settle before he spoke again. His tone shifted slightly, less diagnostic now, more explanatory, as if he was stepping them through something complex but important to understand. "I want to explain this clearly," he said, "because the term I used, psychogenic non-epileptic seizures or PNES, can be confusing and frankly alarming if it's not broken down properly." Talia nodded faintly, still visibly shaken. Andrew stayed focused, attentive, his posture steady but intent. Dr. Adams continued. "First, the most important point, PNES are real events. Your son is not imagining them and he is not consciously controlling them. What you are seeing, collapse, shaking, unresponsiveness, changes in breathing, those are genuine physical symptoms." He paused slightly to make sure that he landed. "But they are not caused by epilepsy," he added. "They are not caused by abnormal electrical discharges in the brain like epileptic seizures are." Talia's voice was barely audible. "Then what causes it?" Dr. Adams nodded, anticipating the question. "PNES is what we call a functional neurological condition. That means the brain is structurally normal, but the way it processes stress, emotion, or psychological overload is disrupted. The nervous system essentially enters a seizure-like state as a response, not from electrical misfiring but from the brain's stress and emotional regulation systems." Andrew's expression tightened slightly as he processed it. "So it's stress expressed physically," he said carefully. "Yes," Dr. Adams replied. "That's a good way to put it. It's the body expressing something the mind or emotional system is overwhelmed by, even if the person isn't consciously aware of that connection." Talia shook her head slowly, "But he doesn't look stressed when it happens, it just comes out of nowhere." "That's very common," Dr. Adams said gently. "The trigger isn't always obvious in the moment. It can be accumulated stress, emotional pressure, trauma history, or even internal conflict that the brain has not processed in a healthy way. Sometimes the body responds before the person can consciously recognize what's building." He leaned forward slightly, voice steady but compassionate. "And I want to be very clear about this, PNES is not faking, and it is not a psychiatric illness in the sense of imagining symptoms. It is a real neurobiological response involving the brain's stress networks." Andrew nodded slowly, absorbing that distinction. "So clinically," Andrew said, "you're saying his brain is functioning normally in terms of structure but not regulating stress responses correctly." "Exactly," Dr. Adams said. "That's a very accurate way to describe it." Talia pressed a hand against her chest. "So when it happens, is he in danger?" "During the episode itself," Dr. Adams said, "the main risks are physical injury from falling or complications from prolonged episodes like breathing irregularities. That's why you treated it correctly tonight by calling emergency services and ensuring he was monitored." He paused again. "But PNES itself is not the same as a seizure disorder like epilepsy, and it does not carry the same direct neurological risks. The danger is indirect, not from brain activity but from the body's stress response and what happens during the episodes." Andrew looked toward the door where Tate had been taken earlier. "And treatment?" he asked. Dr. Adams didn't hesitate. "Treatment is not anti-seizure medication. Instead, it focuses on retraining the brain's stress response. That usually involves psychological therapy, often trauma-informed therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, sometimes psychiatric support and learning to identify and manage triggers." Talia's voice cracked. "So he needs therapy?" "Yes," Dr. Adams said gently, "not because he is broken, but because he's hurt and his nervous system is reacting in a way that can be addressed and improved with the right care." The doctor's office went quiet again. Talia looked down at her hands, trembling. Andrew finally spoke more quietly, almost to himself. "So we've been treating the wrong diagnosis." Dr. Adams met his eyes. "For epilepsy, yes," he said. "But what matters now is that you finally have a clearer explanation of what's actually happening, and that gives us a better path forward." Talia let out a shaky breath, still overwhelmed, but listening now instead of fighting the information. "And he can get better?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Dr. Adams nodded. "Yes," he said. Many patients improve significantly with the right support, but Tate won't admit there's a problem or resets the room to avoid facing the truth. How can we help a wounded man if he resents the truth or creates a truth he can more comfortably handle? The goal is not just to stop the episodes, it's to help the brain and body learn safer ways to process stress so they don't need to express it this way. Andrew stayed still for a moment, then gave a small, slow nod, processing not just the diagnosis but what it meant for everything that had come before it. The weight in the room didn't disappear, but it shifted from panic and confusion into something they could finally start to understand. Dr. Adams let out a slow breath, folding his hands together on the desk as he chose his words carefully. "Mrs. Blue," he began gently, "your son does have a condition, and it is causing his neurological system to temporarily mimic what looks like epilepsy or seizures." Talia stiffened slightly at the formal address, but she didn't interrupt this time. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, red-rimmed and exhausted, as if she was holding herself together by sheer force. Dr. Adams continued. "The condition we're talking about, PNES, requires a very specific kind of treatment, and I want to be clear with you both, the sooner we address it properly, the better the outcomes tend to be." Andrew's posture subtly straightened, attentive now in a more clinical way. He was listening like someone trying to map out a path forward in real time. Dr. Adams leaned forward slightly. "I would strongly recommend that your son begin therapy as soon as he is medically stable enough to do so. Specifically, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is currently considered the gold standard treatment for psychogenic non-epileptic seizures." Talia frowned slightly. "Therapy for seizures?" "Yes," Dr. Adams said calmly, "because the seizures are not coming from electrical dysfunction in the brain, they're coming from how the brain processes stress, emotion, and internal pressure. CBT helps retrain those patterns." He continued, more structured now, almost like outlining a plan they could hold onto. "In many cases, CBT has been shown to significantly reduce episode frequency, sometimes by 50% or more. It helps patients identify triggers, understand the connection between emotional stress and physical response, and develop healthier coping mechanisms so the body doesn't need to express distress in this way." Andrew absorbed that quietly. "So, it's essentially rewiring the response pattern." "That's a fair way to describe it," Dr. Adams agreed. "We're not treating brain damage, we're treating learned neurophysiological responses." Talia's voice came out strained. "But he doesn't look like he's stressed. He's been like this for years and we never knew." Dr. Adams nodded sympathetically. "That's part of what makes PNES so complex," he said. "The stressors are not always visible. Sometimes they are long-term, sometimes internalized, sometimes tied to emotional history the patient hasn't fully processed or even consciously recognized." He paused, then added more gently, "It's not about blame, it's about understanding how the nervous system has learned to respond." Andrew spoke again, quieter now. "What else besides CBT?" Dr. Adams seemed to appreciate the question. "Good question," he said. "CBT is the foundation, but it's often combined with other approaches depending on the individual." He ticked them off carefully, measured and clinical but still accessible. "Psychoeducation is important, helping both the patient and family understand what PNES actually is. That alone reduces fear and misinterpretation of episodes." He glanced briefly at Talia as he said it. "Mindfulness-based therapies can also help regulate stress responses in real time, learning grounding techniques before escalation occurs." Then his tone softened slightly. "And if there are co-occurring conditions such as anxiety, depression, or PTSD, those must be addressed directly. PNES often improves significantly when those underlying factors are treated." Talia looked down, absorbing it slowly, her hands trembling less now but her expression still overwhelmed. "So, this isn't just about the seizures," she said quietly. "No," Dr. Adams confirmed, "it's about the system that produces them." A heavy silence settled in the room again, but it was different now, less chaotic, more structured, like something broken had been named clearly enough that it could finally be approached. Andrew's posture subtly straightened, attentive now in a more clinical way. He was listening like someone trying to map out a path forward in real time. Dr. Adams leaned forward slightly. I would strongly recommend that your son begin therapy as soon as he is medically stable enough to do so. Specifically, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is currently considered the gold standard treatment for psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. Talia frowned slightly. Therapy for seizures. Yes, Dr. Adams said calmly, because the seizures are not coming from electrical dysfunction in the brain, they're coming from how the brain processes stress, emotion, and internal pressure. CBT helps retrain those patterns. He continued, more structured now, almost like outlining a plan they could hold onto. Talia's voice came out strained, but he doesn't look like he's stressed. He's been like this for years and we never knew. Dr. Adams nodded sympathetically. Mindfulness-based therapies can also help regulate stress responses in real time, learning grounding techniques before escalation occurs. Then his tone softened slightly. And if there are co-occurring conditions such as anxiety, depression, or PTSD, those must be addressed directly. PNES often improves significantly when those underlying factors are treated. Talia looked down, absorbing it slowly. Her hands trembling less now, but her expression still overwhelmed. So, this isn't just about the PNES seizures, she said quietly. No, Dr. Adams confirmed, it's about the system that produces them. A heavy silence settled in the room again, but it was different now, less chaotic, more structured, like something broken had been named clearly enough that it could finally be approached. Andrew exhaled slowly, processing the shift. So the goal, he said, is not just stopping the episodes, it's changing the response system that creates them. Exactly, Dr. Adams said. We're teaching the brain and body safer ways to handle distress so it doesn't default to seizure-like states. Talia finally looked up again, eyes still wet but more focused than before. And this can actually get better, she asked, voice fragile but steadier. Dr. Adams nodded. Yes, he said, with consistent treatment, many patients see a significant reduction in episodes and in some cases, full remission. The words didn't erase the fear in the room, but for the first time since the ambulance doors had closed, they gave it somewhere to go. Dr. Adams set his clipboard down on the desk with a soft, deliberate motion, the sound small but final in the quiet room. It felt like a transition point, like one phase of the conversation was ending and something more structured, more specialized was beginning. I've also requested that a clinical psychologist observe Tate in his environment as soon as he's stable enough, Dr. Adams said. She's one of the world's leading experts on seizures and traumatic neurological disorders. She specializes in understanding the connection between the brain, trauma, and the body's response to overwhelming experiences. She's the one I told you about from Johns Hopkins, the specialist I believed could help us understand not only what happened to Tate physically, but also what might be happening beneath the surface. Before anyone could respond, the office door opened again. A woman stepped inside with calm precision, the kind of controlled presence that didn't demand attention but naturally held it anyway. She took in the room in a single sweep, Talia's exhausted grief, Andrew's focused stillness, Dr. Adams' clinical steadiness, and adjusted her approach instantly, as if she were already assembling a working model of what was happening. Dr. Adams gestured toward her. This is Dr. Tamara Michaels, he said. We're fortunate to have her with us here at this hospital today. Talia stood quickly, almost too quickly, as if she needed to do something with her anxiety or it would swallow her. Her movements were unsteady, but she reached out anyway and shook Dr. Michaels' hand. Thank you for coming, Talia said immediately, her voice raw. I need someone to explain this to me in a way that makes sense. My son was on the floor tonight and I thought he was dying. I don't understand how this becomes psychological. Dr. Michaels didn't flinch at the intensity. Instead, her expression softened slightly, acknowledging the weight behind the words rather than trying to minimize them. Luckily, I was in Phoenix for a conference and was nearby, so I could fly over here in a few hours. I understand how overwhelming this must feel, she said calmly. And I want to be very clear from the beginning, what your son experienced is not imagined and it is not voluntary. The symptoms are real, the distress is real. What we are trying to understand is the mechanism behind it so we can treat it effectively. Talia nodded faintly, though her breathing was still uneven, like she was trying to catch up emotionally to information she hadn't had time to process. Dr. Michaels turned slightly, her attention shifting to Andrew. I was also informed that the gentleman here, Dr. Andrew Lott, is a trained psychologist, she said, with experience in behavioral and trauma-based work. Andrew gave a small, restrained nod. That's correct. I suspected as much, Dr. Michaels replied, not as a challenge but as a recognition. Your presence here will likely be very important in helping the family translate what's happening clinically into something they can actually work with day to day. Talia looked between them, her face tight with exhaustion and confusion, but also a growing need for structure, anything that could turn this chaos into something understandable. Dr. Michaels took a step further into the conversation, her tone shifting into something more collaborative now. Before we talk about treatment planning, Tamara said gently, I want to understand the full picture from both of you, not just the medical events but the context around them. She glanced at Talia first. When did you first notice these episodes? Were there any changes in stress, environment, or emotional patterns in your son's life around that time? Then her attention moved to Andrew, steady and direct. And from your perspective as a psychologist, what patterns have you observed in his behavior, emotional regulation, or interpersonal stress responses that might be relevant? The room quieted again, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the beginning of analysis, structured, deliberate, and anchored in the shared goal of understanding Tate not as a mystery to be feared, but as a person whose nervous system had learned to express distress in a way that could finally be decoded and eventually treated. Dr. Michaels settled into the chair beside Andrew, placing a thin folder on her lap but not opening it yet. Her posture was composed, but her tone carried the weight of someone choosing each word with care rather than rushing to conclusions. Thank you, Andrew, she said first, briefly acknowledging him. For your notes, your interviews, and the clinical observations you've already compiled, they've been extremely helpful in building a clearer picture. Andrew gave a small nod, reserved but attentive, while Talia remained tense in her seat, watching both of them as if bracing for something she couldn't yet name. Dr. Michaels exhaled softly before continuing. I want to be transparent with you both about something important, she said. I cannot formally diagnose Tate with a specific psychiatric condition at this stage. Our state guidelines require sustained, intensive clinical interaction before we assign a formal diagnosis. Talia's hands tightened in her lap again, but she didn't interrupt this time. She was listening too closely to break the thread. Dr. Michaels continued, voice steady but grounded. However, she added, based on the clinical data we do have, his medical presentation, behavioral history as reported, observed episodes, and the family context you've provided, it is my professional opinion, shared by Andrew here as well, that Tate is very likely presenting with a pattern consistent with complex post-traumatic stress disorder or CPTSD. The words landed heavily in the room, but she didn't stop there. This is not a casual label, she clarified. CPTSD is not just stress or anxiety. It is a condition that develops when a person is exposed to prolonged or repeated psychological stress, often during formative periods of life, especially among kids, where the nervous system becomes conditioned to exist in a state of threat response. Talia's eyes flickered, her breathing shallow, while her hands covered her mouth in shock. Dr. Michaels glanced toward her briefly, then continued. In practical terms, she said, what we see in CPTSD often includes emotional dysregulation, dissociation, intense anxiety responses, difficulty with attachment or trust, and in some cases, somatic expressions of distress. The body begins to express what the mind cannot fully process or verbalize. Andrew's expression shifted slightly at that, as if certain pieces were clicking into place in a way that was uncomfortable but clarifying. Dr. Michaels turned her attention toward him for a moment. Given your clinical background, you'll understand this framing, she said. The nervous system is essentially operating in a prolonged survival state. When that system becomes overloaded, it can manifest in dramatic physical events such as what we are seeing with Tate. Talia finally spoke, voice quiet but strained. So you're saying this is from trauma? Dr. Michaels didn't rush the answer. I am saying, she replied carefully, that the patterns we are observing are highly consistent with trauma-related nervous system dysregulation. And from everything you've shared with me in our brief interview, combined with Andrew's documentation and behavioral analysis, It is very likely that CPTSD is a core contributing factor. A heavy silence followed, not disbelief this time, something more complicated, recognition mixed with grief. Talia looked down, blinking rapidly. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it was this serious." "Doctor." Michael's tone softened slightly, but remained professional. "This is not about blame," she said. "It is about understanding what your son's nervous system has been carrying for a long time without adequate support." Andrew finally spoke, voice low but steady. "So the PNES episodes are likely the somatic expression of that chronic trauma load." "Yes," Dr. Michaels confirmed, "that is a very accurate clinical interpretation." She leaned forward slightly, hands now loosely clasped. "And I want to emphasize something important for both of you," she added. "CPTSD is treatable, PNES is treatable, but treatment has to be integrated. It cannot be purely neurological or purely psychological. It has to address the whole system." Talia looked up again, eyes red but more focused now. "What does treatment look like?" she asked. Dr. Michaels tried to reassure Talia, explaining that while what she had witnessed was terrifying, every decision the medical team was making was focused on giving Tate the best possible chance to recover. She reminded her that severe seizures and traumatic neurological episodes could produce frightening symptoms that looked worse than they often were, and that they would continue monitoring him around the clock. Talia